South Korean President Moon Jae-in backs up the South Korean courts in rulings recently that the victims of forced labor by Japan are entitled to seek compensation. But he cautions both sides in these historical disputes not to antagonize each other. South and North Korea agree to compete as one team in several events at the next Summer Olympics. They also agree to officially tell the International Olympic Committee that they want to host the Games together in 2032. And the immigration authorities on South Korea's Jeju Island have decided to allow 2 asylum seekers from Yemen to stay there as refugees. The 2 are the first to be granted that status out of hundreds that have come to Jeju, saying they're in danger back home. News Center starts now. It's 8:00 p.m. here in Korea. You're watching News Center, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Devin Whiting. President Moon has weighed in on the recent court rulings ordering Japanese companies to compensate Koreans they forced to work for them during World War II. The president says, like in the rulings, that previous agreements between South Korea and Japan do not cancel the rights of individuals to make claims. Our Chief Blue House correspondent, Shin Se-min, has our top story.
President Moon Jae-in has spoken on the latest friction between Seoul and Tokyo over their fraught history. While meeting with lawmakers, part of the Korea-Japan Parliamentarians Union, President Moon said the Korean victims of Japan's forced labor do have the right to claim compensation from Japanese firms. South Korea's Supreme Court ruled in separate cases late this year that 2 Japanese firms must compensate Koreans forced to work in their factories when Japan ruled the Korean peninsula as a colonizer.
President Moon said the issue of forced labor by Japanese firms is the judiciary ruling. And just like Japan, Korea respects the separation of powers between the 3 branches of government. He said while the basic agreement between the 2 countries is still valid, the individual workers' right to claim compensation from Japanese firms has not been done away with.
And on the shutdown of a Japan-funded foundation to compensate Korean women forced by Japan into sexual slavery, President Moon said he hopes to consult with Tokyo to come up with ways to use the money that's already been sent. In 2016, Japan provided 1 billion yen, or about $8.8 million, to run the foundation meant to support the victims. But Korea closed it down last month because it wasn't functioning well. The South Korean leader also spoke about future ties with Japan, saying that the feelings of the people of the 2 countries should not be hurt and calling for prudence in handling such sensitive issues. As for joining forces to handle geopolitical issues in the region, the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, the South Korean leader and the members of the Japanese parliament saw eye to eye and agreed to strengthen communications with related parties. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And meanwhile, yet another South Korean court has ruled in favor of the victims of Japanese forced labor. The Gwangju District Court on Friday dismissed an appeal by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries against its original ruling, ordering the company to pay compensation. That ruling from 2017 requires Mitsubishi to pay one plaintiff around $106,000 and $3,000 to a relative of a victim who's now deceased. This was the 3rd lawsuit by multiple groups of Korean women forced to work for no pay as part of so-called volunteer labor corps at Mitsubishi's munitions factories back in 1944. The first group of these women finally won in the Supreme Court in late November, and the second group won on appeal earlier this month. Another South Korean woman who was sexually enslaved by the Japanese military during World War II has died at the age of 92. According to the Gender Equality Ministry, Lee Kui-nyo was taken to China in 1943 at the age of 17 and was forced to work at a Japanese military brothel there. Lee stayed in China after Korea gained independence from Japan in 1945 and came back home after she regained South Korean nationality in 2011. Gender Equality Minister Jin Sun-mi expressed condolences for the victim and said she would do her utmost to support the other victims still living. With Yi's death, there are only 25 victims registered with the Korean government who are still alive. Ahead of the new year, President Moon has reshuffled a large number of senior government posts, appointing 16 new vice ministers, 2 of whom are vice ministers of finance. Among the new appointees, 3 are current presidential aides. The presidential secretary for jobs, Lee Ho-seung, was appointed the first vice minister of finance. The presidential secretary for economic policy, Cha Yong-hwan, has become the second vice minister at the Office of Government Policy Coordination. And the presidential secretary for science and technology, Moon Mi-ok, is now the first vice minister of culture. According to the Blue House, the main objective of replacing these officials is to create a more dynamic cabinet and to revitalize the nation's sluggish economy ahead of the president's 3rd year in office. South Korea has a society that's rapidly getting older, and if things don't change, that poses major problems for the country's pension system down the road. Today, the Ministry of Health and Welfare proposed 4 different ways to change the system, a couple of which involve raising the amount people have to pay. Sub Bin walks us through the proposals.
The Ministry of Health and Welfare has announced 4 possible reform plans for the national pension system on Friday that aim to get the most out of the available resources. In the first proposal, the government would maintain the current scheme effectively as it is. This proposal would only increase the basic pension to $300 per month in 2021. The second proposal would increase the basic pension to $350 in 2022 and keep the current income replacement rate at 40%. This would increase the actual amount a person can receive to $900. The other plans involve raising the premium rate from the current rate of 9% to 12% in order to increase the income replacement rate to 45%, with the total pension reaching up to $800, and raising the premium rate to 13% while increasing the income replacement rate to 50%. The government has stressed the decision on reforming pensions should be made through social consensus.
Based on the proposals presented today, the reform plan should be selected through social discussions. The government will faithfully support and actively participate in the process of discussing the pension reform.
South Korea's state pension fund is said to be on course to be depleted by 2057 under the current system due to the low birth rate and slowdown in economic growth. Bin, Arirang News.
South and North Korea are planning a bid to host the Summer Olympics together in 2032. They agreed today to move forward with the bid and send a letter of intent to the IOC. And for the Olympics coming up in Tokyo in 2020, they agreed to compete as a single team in some events. Our Park Hee-jun has this report.
South and North Korea's joint bid to co-host the 2032 Summer Olympics is gathering speed. The 2 Koreas held sports talks at the liaison office in Kaesong on Friday, led by Seoul's Vice Sports Minister Roh Tae-gang and his North Korean counterpart Won Gi-ru. At the talks, Seoul and Pyongyang agreed to send a letter of intent to the International Olympic Committee at the earliest possible date. And next February, they will co-host a meeting with the IOC in Switzerland to discuss the matter with various sports officials, including the sports ministers of the 2 Koreas and the head of the IOC. South and North Korea have also agreed to send unified teams to the 2020 Tokyo Olympics and march together at the opening ceremony. They plan to train and field joint teams mainly in events the 2 Koreas have already competed in. They previously combined their teams in women's hockey, table tennis, women's basketball, rowing, and canoeing. And Vice Sports Minister Noh revealed that there were 8 events in which both sides hope to participate together in. The 2 Koreas will also march together at the Tokyo 22 Paralympics. Boosting cooperation in sports is one of the agreements reached by South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at their Pyongyang summit in September. The 2 Koreas have been increasing such exchanges since they first fielded a unified team for women's ice hockey at the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. They competed together in various events, including the World Table Tennis Championships and the Asian Games. The 2 Koreas will continue with their efforts to implement their agreements through additional meetings and the exchange of documents. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
A team of South Korean officials returned home on Thursday from a 3-day trip to North Korea, focused on pushing ahead with a joint project in forestry. Seoul's Unification Ministry says the two sides held working-level talks on ways to modernize tree nurseries and control pests. They also inspected tree nurseries in the North's Hwanghae-Bukdo province and in Pyongyang, as well as factories that make forestry-related equipment. Based on the inspection, they'll work on a detailed plan for their forestry cooperation after seeking advice from organizations and experts. South Korea and the U.S. have met several times this year to try and reach a new deal on sharing the costs of stationing American troops here. The existing deal expires in just a couple of weeks at the end of the year. But after a meeting in Seoul again this week, the allies still haven't figured it out. Park Ji-won has the latest.
The latest round of negotiations on the defense cost sharing between South Korea and the U.S. have ended without resulting in a final agreement. According to a foreign ministry official Friday morning, the two allies failed to agree on some of the key issues during the 3-day talks held in Seoul until Thursday, including exactly how much South Korea will pay for defense cost sharing. The official said there's still a clear difference between the two sides' positions on Seoul's financial contribution towards the stationing of some 28,000 American troops on the Korean peninsula. Under the existing deal, South Korea contributed around $850 million this year alone, which is about 50% of the total cost of having U.S. troops stationed here. However, according to a report by the Wall Street Journal, the Trump administration is reportedly calling for South Korea to make a larger financial contribution, asking for about 150% increase from the current level. The South Korean official said the Korean government is willing to assume a reasonable and rational level of burden. The official added that Seoul and Washington will continue close consultations through diplomatic channels, and additional rounds of talks might be held if necessary, probably as early as next month. Since March this year, the two sides held 10 rounds of negotiations led by Ambassador Chang Won-sam and his U.S. counterpart Timothy Betts to sign the new Special Measures Agreement, or SMA, bilateral agreement between the two allies on sharing defense costs. Under the SMA, South Korea pays for South Koreans working at U.S. military bases in the country, as well as costs related to facility construction and logistics. The two sides are pressed for time as the current 5-year SMA, signed in early 2014, will expire at the end of this month. If the two allies fail to reach the deal by the end of the year, the wages of some 8,000 South Korean workers at the U.S. military bases could be affected. The official said the two sides are doing their best to minimize any impact on the civilian workers. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The latest figures show profits plunging in South Korea's defense industry. They're apparently having some trouble selling their products overseas, and the shipbuilding industry in particular has been struggling. The government said today, though, that help is on the way. Choi Si-young reports.
According to a report Friday by the Korea Defense Industry Association, the 93 companies responsible for delivering military equipment to the government recorded total sales of around $11.5 billion in 2017, down roughly 14% from the previous year. This is the first time revenues have fallen since the association began to collect data in 1983. Those companies also saw their combined profits tumble to around $50 million, down from an average of $400 million between 2014 and 2016. The reasons cited for the lower profits include a decrease in exports, worsening profitability in the shipbuilding industry, and insufficient government support. So at the meeting headed by the Defense Minister and the Defense Acquisition Program Administration, the government introduced measures to help the companies.
The government will strengthen support for exports by defense contractors and strive to revitalize the country's defense industry.
The minister also addressed the shipbuilding industry's demand that the government help cover the risk of building new vessels because a big accident can threaten a firm's existence. The government promised the companies that it'll consult with other ministries to prepare a budget for shipbuilding insurance next year. The minister declared that he will continue holding the talks with the heads of defense contractors to hear their concerns and propose that they build a reciprocal relationship. Choi Si-young, Arirang News.
South Korea has granted refugee status to 2 asylum seekers from Yemen who are fleeing their country's civil war. They're the first ones to be allowed to stay as refugees out of nearly 500 who arrived on South Korea's Jeju Island earlier this year. Hong Yu has the details.
For the first time ever, the immigration authorities on Korea's Jeju Island have granted 2 Yemenis refugee status. These 2 refugees are among the 484 Yemenis that fled from their country to Korea's Jeju Island and had applied to stay as refugees on the island. The 2 are journalists that had written articles critical of the Houthi rebels in Yemen. The authorities on Jeju judged that there is a high possibility they could be kidnapped, murdered, or otherwise harmed by the rebels if they return to Yemen. For 412 other Yemenis, the service gave them humanitarian stay permits, while rejecting 22 Yemenis applications. The humanitarian stay permits will allow the holders to remain in South Korea for 1 year. Friday's decision wrapped up the last of 3 screenings this year to determine the status of the Yemenis. Over the past months, the Immigration Service has faced criticism for taking too much time and for not having enough staff to process the applications. Based on Friday's announcement, the National Human Rights Commission of Korea has requested improvements in refugee protection measures. It stated that the Immigration Office has applied the requirements of refugee recognition too strictly because of the public's negative perception of refugees and has been unable to solve the refugee issues effectively. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
National Assembly Speaker Moon Hee-sang and the floor leaders of South Korea's 5 main parties finally reached an agreement this afternoon to open an extraordinary session for December, starting next Monday, the 17th. Speaking to reporters after holding 2 separate meetings on Friday, the ruling party floor leader Hong Yong-pyo said the leaders agreed that in the December session, they'll pass bills related to people's livelihoods and that more discussions will follow over the next few days regarding how long the session will last and which bills to include. He said future discussions will also touch on reforming the nation's electoral system, something some of the smaller opposition parties want to take up. The leaders of some of those have been on a hunger strike for the past 9 days, demanding a deal on the electoral reform by the end of this year. This year, South Korea raised its minimum wage by more than 16%, a huge jump from previous years. What kind of effect it's having on the economy has been hotly debated, but the Bank of Korea says previous wage hikes have raised productivity in manufacturing. Go Jun-hee has this report.
According to the Bank of Korea's report released on Friday, the impact of the rise in the minimum wage varies by sector and the number of workers a business employs. The analysis written by BOK researcher Yuk Seung-hwan is based on data from Statistics Korea, including a survey on the economically active population and an employment survey covering different regions taken between 2011 and 2016. The study calculates the influence rate of the minimum wage, which measures the ratio of workers affected by the minimum wage hike to the total number of workers in an industry. And the rate varied depending on sector and the sizes of companies. For instance, the rate was high in industries related to food and clothing, meaning there's a high share of people affected by the minimum wage rise in those sectors. In contrast, the rate was low in people for working at oil refineries. The rate was also higher at small firms compared to their larger counterparts. It also found out how the rise in the minimum wage affected the qualitative aspects of the economy, such as workers' productivity. The manufacturing industry saw its productivity improve over the cited period, as higher salaries encourage employees to work harder. By sector, workers in the auto and textile goods sectors experienced a more positive effect in productivity compared to the electronics sector. By size, bigger firms experienced clear improvements in productivity compared to smaller firms. The report added such positive effects have the possibility to offset the negative effects coming from the sharp increase in labor costs. Ko-Roon-hee, Arirang News.
The South Korean government has laid out a plan to create 55,000 new jobs in the healthcare services sector by 2022 to help provide a high level of customer service nationwide. The Presidential Committee on Job Creation said Friday that the government has set aside nearly $5.3 million for the plan next year, which includes establishing social services centers. These centers will be tasked with generating high-quality jobs and improving the work environment in the health sector, as well as creating child care centers and nursing homes for senior citizens in areas with high demand. The committee says it's part of efforts to realize the government's goal of inclusive growth and to help create jobs in provincial areas. These days, there's nothing unusual about women pursuing higher degrees and working side by side with men. But the latest figures show that for many South Korean women who are married, it's a struggle to get into the workforce and to stay in. So Eun-Kyung explains.
In recent years, more and more Koreans have taken a positive view about women in being part of the workforce. The percentage of Koreans who think it is good for women to have jobs has increased to 87.2% last year, up 2.7 percentage points from 2013. But despite the widespread point of view, married women appear to have a hard time landing and keeping jobs. The employment rate among women is almost the same as that of men overall. Last year, the gap was only 1.6 percentage points. But among married men and women, the gap surged to 28.5. The main reasons women left the workforce were pregnancy, child-rearing, and not enough support from their families. And though the vast majority of Koreans say they think women should work, the attitude changes when it comes to their own wives. As of 2016, less than half of married men wanted their wives to work. Having children appeared to make it harder for women to work too. The participation of men in the job market is steady and appears unaffected by whether or not they have kids or how old the kids are. Among women with teenagers, almost 70% of them have jobs, but among those with kids younger than 6, the rate is only 46.4%. In fact, 35.6% of married women said they have quit working either to raise and educate their children or to take care of their families. Eun-Kyung, Arirang News.
Last summer, South Korea's major cinema chains refused to show the Korean film Okja because its distributor, Netflix, released it online so quickly the theaters felt they were getting ripped off. The same thing is happening again this week with the Netflix-distributed film Roma. Won Jung-Hwan reports.
Netflix, the world's largest online streaming platform, has angered Korean cinemas with its latest release. Roma, Alfonso Cuarón's critically acclaimed portrayal of family life in 1970s Mexico, which won a Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival, was released on the streaming platform this Friday, just 2 days after it began showing in cinemas. Only some 40 cinemas across Korea are screening Roma, as major cinema chains are boycotting the movie, claiming Netflix should follow the standard 3-week holdback period where films are shown exclusively in movie theaters. They argue that shortening the exclusive window from 3 weeks devalues the theatrical experience and discourages people from leaving their homes to watch movies.
A release of the streaming service within just 2 days of opening doesn't respect existing Korean cinema ecosystem, and it can be regarded as a move to strengthen their own platform in the Korean market.
Netflix, on the other hand, claims that releasing movies to streaming subscribers and in theaters simultaneously so gives consumers, including roughly 900,000 South Korean subscribers, more choice over their movie-watching experience. But as the battle between the streaming giant and cinema chains heightens, ordinary people who just want to enjoy the movie could be the ones who end up losing out. Won Jung-Hwan, Arirang News.
And now we turn to Michelle Park for the latest updates from the Weather Center. Michelle, what's in store for us this weekend?
Well, Devin, I have some warming news for you. Saturday morning is going to be freezing cold, but the mercury is expected to bounce back into the positive territory by the afternoon. In fact, we will reach seasonal average temperatures by the end of the day, and the weather in Beijing will be very similar to Seoul, while Tokyo is expected to be pretty much like Korea's Jeju Island. Until then, bundle up because Saturday morning in Seoul will start at -6 degrees Celsius and Chuncheon will be colder at -12 degrees. And daily highs over in Seoul will reach up to 3 degrees, while Busan and Jeju hits 10 and 9 degrees respectively. Temperatures will stay on the moderate side all week long until next week, and we will also have some snowfall on Sunday. And the snow will mostly fall in the northern regions this time, with the capital city expecting less than 1 centimeter of snow. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
And that's where we'll wrap up tonight's newscast. Thanks for being with us. Make sure to tune in over the weekend as well. Bye for now.